Hi guys, Alex here from ALEXEIR Studios. Today we're recreating the splitting double iris and cursed symbols effects from the 2017 film The Mummy. And this is going to be a two-part tutorial, so in this video we're going to be working on the splitting double iris effect, and in the second part, which comes out next Monday, we will be working on creating the cursed symbols appearing on skin. So if you're watching this video in the future, check out the description, the video is already out. Now, filming tips. I will actually be giving tips at the beginning of the tutorial, but I forgot to mention one thing. Makeup. Some black eyeshadow and an eyeliner would go a really long way here. And in general, when working on effects like this, it's always important to create as much as you possibly can in camera. So that's just something to keep in mind for the future. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the future uploads. It really helps us grow and keeps the tutorials coming. Also, like the video and maybe leave a comment. Let's move to After Effects. I don't know why I keep doing that. Okay, so to start off, I only really have two tips here. The first tip would be when you are filming, make sure that the irises of your actor's eye are fully visible. Maybe not fully, but make sure that they are very well visible. This also depends on the angle of the camera a little bit. Just make sure that the irises are very well visible, because if you don't have a well visible iris, you won't be able to do this effect. You just won't have as much detail to work with. So make sure that it's this, but not this. And the second tip would be, since we're recreating a specific effect from the 2017 film The Mummy, I think it would be really helpful to look at the actual shot from the film and use it as a reference. So throughout the entire process, I was using that clip from the movie as a reference, and as I was editing, I was looking at the clip, looking back at my footage, and trying to get as close as possible to that look from the film. Oh, and actually tip number 3, which is really important, make sure you ask your actor not to blink when you're shooting this clip. Unless blinking is specifically something you want in this effect. But if you don't, then make sure that there's no blinking going on, because this will complicate your entire workflow like 100 times. Now let's get to editing. So step number 1, you need to look through your clip and you need to pause on a frame where the irises are fully, completely visible and sharp. Make sure there's no motion blur or anything else going on. They need to be really sharp, because this is the frame where we will be taking the irises from and kind of using them for the entire effect. Once you've done that, we will next need to remove the irises actually, because we will be creating a completely new look for the irises. So you need to make sure that when you're creating the look, the irises that are originally there, they are not in the background. So you need the eye to be completely white for this. Go to Composition, save frame as, File, and in Output module, just change the render settings. You can see what I'm doing on the screen. Just make sure that you're saving this frame as a Photoshop file. Like I said, we need to remove the irises so that the eyes are completely white for now. And we will be doing that in Photoshop. We will use a frequency separation action for this. If you don't have this action, make sure to check our Patreon link down below. You will be able to download the action from our Patreon. On our Patreon, you will also be able to find a 4K raw clip from this tutorial, as well as the After Effects project file I'm working on right now, and all the other assets. Okay, so in Photoshop, select the action, press play, and I'm setting the radius setting to something like 9, but this will be individual for every clip. Just make sure that the blur amount is something like you see on the screen. Open up the action folder and hide the high frequency layer. Click on the low frequency layer and select the healing brush tool. Now you can just alt-click on the white area and sample the texture from there, and you can use that texture to paint over the iris. As you can see, we're getting rid of the iris this way. Feel free to sample a texture from different areas. Just paint over the entire iris and do the same thing for the second eye. Once you've done that, turn the high frequency layer back on, and as you can see, the iris is pretty much gone, but the texture is still kind of there. So this is what we need the high frequency layer for. On it, we will be removing the actual texture. So grab the healing brush tool again and paint over both irises again, but this time you're actually getting rid of the texture. Great, you can now close the folder and create a new layer. Set the blending mode to color, grab the paintbrush, click on the color, And you can now sample the color from the white parts of the eye. Change the flow setting of the brush to something smaller and start painting over the area we just worked on. As you can see, this way we now kind of even out the color, because after we removed the iris, that area was kind of like still blue. So we need to make sure that this area is also white color as the rest of the eye is. Great, I'm then going to create a new curves layer and set the blending mode to luminosity. Create a highlight curve, meaning just raise the highlights pretty high, and I just renamed the layer to highlight. I then created another curves layer, set the blending mode to luminosity as well, but this time I am creating the shadows, meaning I'm just dragging the curve down and creating dark shadows. I also renamed this layer to shadow. I then click on the mask and click invert. Same thing for the highlight layer. Then make sure that the paintbrush is selected and change the flow setting to something like 6%. Also make sure that the color is set to white. Basically, as you can see, the masks of those curve layers are black, and this is because using the paintbrush that is set to white color, we will now be applying the effects. Before this, I'm just quickly duplicating the highlight and shadow layers and putting them in a group. Now click on the mask of the highlight layer, select the brush, and again make sure that it's set to white color, and just start painting over the dark areas of the iris that we removed. Because as you can see, even though we removed the texture of the iris, it's still kind of visible that there was some kind of a circle there. So we need to even everything out and remove the shadows. You can see what we're doing here. We're kind of getting rid of all the mess and making sure that the eye is clean. It's just as if there was never an iris there in the first place. Once you're finished with the highlights, now click on the shadow layer mask, and same exact logic here, but you are just removing the highlights now. So with the white color selected for the brush, you can now go over the highlight areas and remove the highlights if necessary. Great, the white eyes are all done. Make sure you save them as a PNG image. PNG files just preserve a little more quality. And now open the exported frame from After Effects again. So in the previous Photoshop file, we worked on the white eyes, and now we will work on the iris itself a little bit. We will just make a few quick adjustments here. So what we need to do here is we need to remove the highlights from the iris, and we also need to brighten the iris overall a little bit. Duplicate the image just in case, and select the patch tool this time. On the duplicated layer, just circle around the highlight and sample the black dark area. As you can see, this completely removes the reflection, and if there's any detail left over from the reflection, you can do the same thing and just sample the dark areas again. If you want to make sure that the pupil is completely dark, create a new curves layer, drag the curve down, click on the mask, invert, select the paintbrush with the white color, and just paint over the pupil. I then created a new layer, clicked image, apply image, and just clicked OK. I clicked on the healing brush and just painted some texture on top of the eyelashes. We will be editing the irises in After Effects, so I just wanted to make sure that the eyelashes are not there just in case. Do the same thing for the second eye. And we only have one more thing to do in Photoshop. Create a new layer, select the white color, change the blending mode of the layer to overlay. You can set the flow of the brush to something higher here and just paint over the iris. As you can see, this makes the iris really pop and brings out the detail and the color. I left this layer at something like 40%. Okay, and just to add a little bit more detail, I did one more thing. I created a new layer, went to image, apply image, clicked OK, and then I went to filter, other, high pass, and I increased the radius setting until I was able to see the detail in the eye. Click OK, and change the blending mode to linear light. Create a mask for this layer, click on it, and invert it. You can now set the flow setting to 100%, and with the white color selected on the brush, just paint over the iris. As you can see, this makes the iris sharp and brings out all the detail. I lowered the opacity setting to something like 50%. And now just save the image as a PNG file again. Okay, and we're back in After Effects. We now need to track the eye, and this should be a pretty easy process if you asked your actor not to blink. I will be using Spot Clone Tracker effect from Red Giant to track. If you don't have the plugin, just use a built-in tracker in After Effects. So in Spot Clone Tracker, I will change the overlay to faster tracking, and I will change the spot opacity to 0. In Clone From, I will also set it to explicitly, and I will use the orange tracker, which is Spot, to track the right eye, and Clone From, which is the blue tracker, to track the left eye. Increase the size of the tracker to match the size of the irises, adjust the tracker so that it fills the entire iris, and just track the clip forward. And now I'm just going to repeat the process for the left eye, so I will make sure that the tracker is positioned in a way that covers the entire iris, and I will track it forward. Great, the track is done, and next I will import the white eyes image. So we will work on just removing the iris first. I duplicate this image and rename the layers, one to right eye and the second to left eye. I then open up the position property on the right eye layer. I alt-click the position watch, parent the position to spot center. Same thing for the left eye, alt-click position and parent the position to clone from. Oh, and by the way, when you parent the position to the tracker and adjust it further, make sure that you are on the frame that you exported for Photoshop. For me, this just happened to be the very first frame of the clip, because there was the most detail on the first frame. So you can see that after we parented the position kind of changed, like the clip is somewhere else in the composition. So to put it back, we will need to open up the anchor point setting, so just click A on keyboard and manually just put it back. The way I'm doing it is I am making sure that these little squares are perfectly on the outline, like right in the middle. And do the same thing for the left eye. Okay, next I will click on the right eye layer, select the pen tool, and create a really rough mask around the iris. Same thing on the left eye. If you notice that the tracking isn't very smooth, then just create some keyframes on the anchor point and manually adjust the position that way. I also changed the shapes of the mask a little bit, but this will be individual for every clip. Just make sure that everything looks good to you. And then I went to the end and adjusted the anchor point a little bit with the keyframes activated. Okay, in the mask settings, I feathered the masks out a little bit. Well, not a little bit, I actually set it to 70. And adjust the shape of the mask again if you need to. This looks pretty cool, but I wanted to bring back some detail from the original clip at the top area of the eye. So I created a rough mask around the eyelashes, and I changed the blending mode of the mask to subtract and feathered the mask out. This just brought back some detail around the eyelash area. I then went ahead and did the same thing for the left eye. Now let's go ahead and import the iris Photoshop edit into the composition. Duplicate the layer, and using the pen tool create a very precise, this time, mask around the iris. In the mask settings, feather the mask out so that it looks blended. I left it at 20, but I will later be going back to those settings. If necessary, also adjust the mask expansion settings. Now do the same thing for the left iris. Great, now go ahead and pre-compose each iris layer separately. You can now rename the pre-comps to right iris and left iris. And just as we did with white eyes, you will now need to open up the position parameters and parent the iris layers to the spot clone tracker effect. You will need to parent the right iris to spot center and left iris to clone from. Now you can see that the iris is moved again, and this is because we haven't adjusted the anchor point settings. Because the anchor point settings are going to be the same here, we can simply just copy paste them from the right and left eye layers. So open up the anchor point settings, and using Ctrl+C, copy anchor point settings from right eye layer, and using Ctrl+V, place them on right iris. And same thing for the left eye and iris. We are going to start working on the effect now, but before that, double-click on the right eye pre-comp very quickly and add a liquify effect. Now using the pucker tool in liquify, we're going to make the pupil a little bit smaller. And this is just so that there's a little bit more space and detail in the iris, so that the pupil doesn't take up as much space. If the effect you created is too strong, you can always go to distortion percentage and decrease it a little bit. Now do the same thing for the left iris, just go into left iris pre-comp, add a liquify effect, and also using the pucker tool, make the pupil a little bit smaller. I will then adjust the scale of the iris layers. I set it to 85, and I will also change the rotation settings. I tilted the right iris to the right a little bit, and left iris to the left, so that they kind of tilt towards each other. I also right-clicked on the right iris, went to transform, and clicked flip horizontal. And I did one more thing. With anchor point settings open, on the first frame of the clip, I sort of dragged the eyes a little bit closer to the beginning of the eye, but not too close. Because after that, I went to the last frame of the clip, and I dragged the eyes even more towards the beginning. And this is because when we add the second iris, we will need to have a little bit more space in the eye, because there will be obviously two irises, so we need to save a little bit more space for both of them to fit. This looks a little bit funny right now, but it's okay, we'll get there. And one last thing that I did is I actually added keyframes on rotation. So on the first frame of the clip, I left rotation at 0, so that the eye looks kind of just normal. And then at the end, when the irises are separated, I rotated it to something like 9, and I think this will just make the effect cooler. Now we can actually get to creating the separation effect, and we will be doing that by using the mirror effect in the distort group. Apply it to the right iris pre-comp, and using the reflection center parameter, we will now make the second iris appear out of nowhere. But before that, if you look at the reference clip from the actual movie, you will notice that on the first frame of the effect, the iris kind of appears just normal. You can see that there's some kind of minor distortion, but on the first glance, it just appears to be a normal iris pretty much. And then from there, the second iris just kind of appears out of nowhere. But the thing that is going to make the most difference here in it being realistic is the way it appears in terms of movement. If you have seen last year's movie The Substance, you probably remember the opening shot of the egg yolks separating. Well, the way they separate is pretty similar to the way our irises are going to separate here. Think of it just as of two egg yolks separating, just like in The Substance's opening scene. We will be recreating this specific movement later using different effects, so we will not be doing this with the mirror effect, but with the mirror we just kind of need to create the base, as in just the second iris appearing out of the first one. So in the mirror effect, adjust the reflection center settings until you can see the iris duplicating. I'm also adjusting the reflection angle here, because like I said, on the first frame I want the iris to appear normal, just as if there was basically very little distortion. Great, so on the first frame we now have a somewhat normal looking iris. Now I'm gonna go to the last frame of the clip and I'm going to push it out all the way. Adjust the reflection angle setting if necessary. I then selected both reflection center and reflection angle keyframes and clicked F9 on the keyboard. What we did here is we activated Easy Ease on keyframes. And I also dragged the last frame's keyframes to a little bit earlier in the clip, because I want the effect to finish earlier so that it's fully visible for some time at the end. Now repeat the same process for the left iris. You can also see how the irises are tilted. So the right irises are sort of tilted to the right and left irises to the left. They are kind of tilted towards each other. Now that we have the base, which is both irises, we will now need to create the realistic movement, and this is the most important thing in this effect. This is what's really gonna make it look realistic and sell it. And we will be working on the movement using the liquify tool in After Effects. So for the movement, you can really use the substances opening scene as the reference, where the two egg yolks are separating. The way the second iris is going to appear from the first one is pretty similar to that scene. It's a little bit hard to explain, so just look at the reference clip, but basically the way I understand it is the second iris is kind of squeezed into the first iris in the beginning, and then it kind of almost jumps out of it and gains its original shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the liquify effect onto the right iris layer. I'm gonna go to the last frame, activate the keyframe on distortion mesh, and first using the pucker tool, I want to make the second iris smaller. Mind you, this is the last frame of the clip, so on this frame we will be working on the final look of the effect. So when the effect happens, this is how it's going to look on this frame. This is the final look after the animation. So I wanted the second iris to be a little bit smaller, and I wanted it to look different from the original iris. And I also kind of created a little bit of this 3D shape, almost as if they are bended to the shape of the actual eye. And in the middle, I also created a little bit of this separation between them. You can really work on the shape here, and you can change it however you want. And you can also tilt the irises a little bit more to emphasize the effect. I then moved the keyframe that we just created on distortion mesh to where I moved the mirror keyframe, so that the liquify animation ends on the same frame as the mirror animation does. I then repeated the same process for the left iris. So I applied the liquify effect, set the keyframe on distortion mesh, and using pucker and warp tools just distorted the shape to match the right iris's shape. Well, not necessarily match, it can actually look a little bit different depending on the look you're going for. After that, back on the right iris pre-comp, I went to the very first frame of the clip and I completely reset the liquify effect. Same thing on the left iris. So now we are working on the very start of the effect. And for this, I was really paying attention to how they did it in the actual movie. So again, on the first frame, it appears as if it's just one normal iris, just a little bit distorted. So this is the look I kind of went for here. I'm just making it appear as if it was just one normal iris, but there is some kind of distortion and it looks like something is kind of off. And then I went to the middle of the effect, set the keyframe there, and here I am going to try to recreate this egg yolk kind of separation. It's that thing I mentioned where the pupils are kind of squeezed towards each other and then they separate and return to their original shape. So you can kind of see the shape I'm going for on the screen. Try to recreate something similar. And then I just went through the entire clip and stopped on places that needed adjusting. So if the effect looked off somewhere, I paused on that frame and adjusted the liquify settings. So these three keyframes that we previously created, they were kind of the main keyframes, start, middle, and end. And the rest of the keyframes are just to make sure that the effect continues smoothly. The trickiest part to get through was the spot where the pupils were separating one from another. But I just made sure that the pupils are kind of squeezed towards each other and then they just go their separate ways, basically. And then we see that we still have this black kind of residue from the pupils separating, but don't worry about it, we're going to fix that later in the tutorial. So like I said, now just go through the entire clip and make sure that the effect continues smoothly everywhere, from the beginning to the end. Everything should look very smooth. Really take your time adjusting the liquify settings, because this is the main thing that is going to sell the effect, and this is the main thing that is going to make it realistic. You can also always go back and adjust anchor point settings if necessary. Great, now go ahead and repeat the same process with the liquify for the second eye, left iris. So here literally just do the exact same thing, and you can also even work on the same keyframes as right iris and just try to match the look. Just try to do the exact same thing as you did with the right iris. If the animation is slightly different, just go through the entire clip again and adjust the liquify settings where necessary. Now we're going to get rid of that black residue that still remains there after the pupils separate. So look through the clip and pause on a frame where the black residue is visible. You can then go to Composition, save frame as, File, and just save it as a Photoshop file. We will then go to Photoshop again and duplicate the background layer, just the image. You can then grab the clone stamp tool, alt-click somewhere on the iris texture, and just paint over the black residue. Not only black residue, but the entire pupil. Just make sure that there is only iris texture everywhere. You can then also select the healing brush tool and correct the texture a little bit, so that everything looks smooth. You can even paint on top of the shadows at the top. If you want, you can also select the patch tool and correct the texture even more. Do the same thing for the left eye. And then just go ahead and save your edit as a PNG file. Import the frame into After Effects. Duplicate it, and you can rename the layers to something like right texture fill and left texture fill. Open up Spot Clone Tracker settings, open the position parameter on texture layers, and again parent the right eye to spot center and left eye to clone from. Put the layers back to where they were using anchor point. By the way, make sure that you are parenting and adjusting anchor point on the same frame you paused on and exported the file from. You can hide the visibility of the layers for now, and I'm just gonna go ahead and create a rough mask on top of the black residue. I will activate a keyframe on mask path, go to a frame a little bit earlier in the clip, and I will adjust the mask just so that the texture fills this area that's supposed to be between the pupils. I am then going through the entire clip and adjusting the mask path. Basically, with this texture layer, we're just supposed to fill in the space that is supposed to be between the pupils. We are replacing it with the texture we created. So just go through the entire clip and make sure that the mask is smooth everywhere. I will then go to the frame we originally paused on and set the mask feather and mask expansion keyframes. I left the mask feather on something like 30 here. Then I went to the first frame of the clip and adjusted feather and mask expansion settings. You can also just go through the entire clip and adjust those settings. Just make sure that there's always kind of space in between the pupils. And at the end I set the feather settings even higher. I then opened up opacity, set a 100% keyframe in the middle of the clip, went further in the clip where the effect is kind of finished, and set the opacity to something like 40%. This way we still kind of cover the liquify distortion with a little bit of that texture. And that's it, I only had 2 opacity keyframes. Then I clicked on the left texture fill layer, and I repeated the same process. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring back some detail around the eyelash area. So go to Layer, New, Solid, and create a solid layer. You can rename it to right eye. You can then duplicate it and rename it to left eye. I then opened up the position parameters on both solid layers, and I parented the right eye mask to spot center and left eye mask to clone from. You can then solo the raw clip, click on the right eye mask, and create a precise mask around the eye. Set a keyframe on mask path, and just go through the clip to make sure that the mask sticks. It has to be a somewhat precise mask, so just make sure that the mask path is properly animated. Then go ahead and do the same thing for the left eye mask. Change the mask modes of right eye and left eye mask layers to subtract. You can then click off the solo and duplicate the raw clip. Put it under the right eye mask layer and change its track matte to right eye mask. To avoid the raw clip affecting the left eye, grab the pen tool and create a very raw big mask around half of the shot. You can then change this mask to subtract. Duplicate the raw clip again, move it under the left eye mask layer, change the track matte to left eye mask, and on the raw clip layer just draw a mask again around half of the shot. You can then adjust the mask feather settings on the solid masks. I left mask feather at 30 at the end of the clip, then I set the keyframes and set it to something lower in the beginning, but this will be individual for every clip. You might not even need to set any keyframes. I also went back to mask paths and adjusted the mask a little bit. I wanted to bring in more eyelash detail, so I just dragged it a bit lower. I then noticed that on the left iris layer especially, I have this kind of white outline around the iris, and I wanted to get rid of it. So I applied a Refine Soft Matte effect to the layer. I changed the settings a bit here, so I set edge radius to 0 and just enabled the decontaminate edge colors thing. And as you can see, it perfectly got rid of any white outlines I had. I then simply just copy-pasted the Refine Soft Matte effect onto the right iris layer. Also, if the eyes in your footage go in and out of focus, you can apply any kind of blur effect, set the keyframes and just go through the clip and animate the blur settings. I felt like in my clip the eyes were slightly in and out of focus, so I applied a rag defocus effect from Sapphire. You don't have to apply the specific effect, you can use fastbox blur or camera lens blur or anything else out of built-in effects in After Effects. I just set the keyframe on defocus, which is the amount of blur, and went through the clip and slightly adjusted those settings. Okay, now one very important step to finish off the effect is we need to add the natural reflection we had in the eyes back. So what I did is I selected all the solid layers and the raw clips beneath them and I duplicated them, moved them on top, and changed the masks on the solids to add instead of subtract. You can increase the mask expansion on both solids a little bit. I then went to the first raw clip and applied a Luma key effect onto it. I set the key type to key out darker and adjusted threshold setting until I was only able to see the reflections. You can also go through the entire clip to make sure that there is no additional detail picked up apart from the reflections anywhere at any point in the clip. You can increase the edge feather a little bit. I then added an optical glow effect from Red Giant. If you don't have this plugin, just use a built-in glow effect in After Effects. I wanted the reflections to stand out a little bit more, so I kind of just made them pop a little bit more with optical glow. Lastly, I set the blending mode of the layer to screen. Then I went ahead and repeated the same process for the second raw clip, which is the left eye. I applied all the same effects and it's the same logic. Just keep in mind that the settings might be a little bit different, so you can't just copy-paste the effects. And that's it, that's the double iris look all complete. If you want to find out how to create the cursed symbols on skin, tune in next week for the second part of the tutorial. Make sure you check it out because we'll be finalizing the look and completing the effect from the movie. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and make sure to tune in next week for the second part of the tutorial. I really hope you guys learned something new today, and as always, feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments down below. If you recreate any of our effects in your projects and post them, make sure to tag us or send them to us because we would love to check them out. By the way, the person playing the mummy in the video is my friend Megan. Megan is a professional actress and she's really talented. I will leave all her links down below. And obviously don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and click on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the future uploads. And I will see you guys in part 2.